Hi, boys and girls. Today is the day for the last two chapters of Ivy and Bean. Do you remember what was happening on the last day? They snuck back into Bean's yard, but then Bean saw Nancy crying, and she thought, oh, she's crying because she misses me. But really she was crying because she wanted to have pierced ears, and Bean got mad, so she forgot that she was supposed to sneak, and then Nancy saw her, and now Nancy's starting to drag Bean inside so she can get in trouble with her mom. But Ivy is going to try to stop her. This chapter is called The Spell. You see Ivy with her wand, and Nancy is dragging Bean. Nancy stopped dragging Bean across the porch and looked at Ivy. "Who are you?" she asked. Ivy smiled and slitted her eyes. With her white face and red blood drops, she looked very witchy. "It matters not. Free my friend," she hissed. Wow, thought Bean, she's really going for it. Nancy dropped Bean's arm and lifted one eyebrow, which was something she had just learned how to do and did all the time. Can you do it? Like that. Here's a picture of Nancy doing it. You try with your face. "What's that supposed to be?" she asked in a snippy, grown-up way, looking at Ivy's wand. Ivy shook the wand in Nancy's face. "This is your doom," she said in a deep voice. "It's a wand," said Bean, looking back and forth between Ivy and Nancy. She was beginning to worry. Maybe Ivy was going for it too much. With older sisters, you had to be able to say that you never meant what you said, and that you were kidding the whole time. Ivy didn't seem to know that. Nancy snorted. "It's a stick," she said. She looked at Ivy's robe and giggled. "Nice bathrobe, too. You guys are complete and total dweebs." Uh-oh. Bean looked at Ivy. Her cheeks were red under the white paint, and her eyes glittered. She looked like she might cry. Suddenly, Bean was furious. Before, she had been really mad, but now Nancy was making fun of Ivy, and that made Bean furious. Without even stopping to think about it, Bean reached down into the bucket she was still carrying. She got a big handful of pink worms. For a second, they squiggled in her hand, and then she threw them at Nancy's face. Some of them fell onto Nancy's shirt. Some of them got stuck in her hair, but one landed on her eyebrow and wiggled there, trying to find some dirt. Nancy was so surprised she froze. She stood with her mouth hanging open, staring at Bean. Calmly, Bean reached into the bucket and got another handful of worms. She aimed better this time. She got one in Nancy's mouth. Here's a picture of Nancy with the worms coming at her. Do you see the one on her eyebrow? Phew! The pink worm went flying as Nancy spit it out. There was a tiny moment of quiet, and then she opened her mouth wide and let out a giant scream. Ah! Bean and Ivy looked at each other and smiled. Whatever happens next, their eyes said, that was worth it, and they began to run. Nancy tore after them, still screaming. Bean zigzagged across the lawn because she knew it was harder to catch someone who was zigzagging. Ivy zigzagged too, right behind Bean. "Worms! Worms!" Nancy was screaming. She had lost her mind. Ah! Bean could hear her mother calling. "What on earth? Girls! Girls!" Bean and Ivy ran around the trampoline with Nancy close behind. They jumped over the hula hoops and headed for the trees. Nancy followed, still screaming. She was right behind them. She was so close she could almost grab the soft folds of Ivy's robe. She was just about to get it. "Help!" squealed Ivy. Bean gave a yank and pulled the robe away in the nick of time. Ivy and Bean swerved for the playhouse. Maybe they could get inside before Nancy tackled them. "Come on," Bean yelled. Together they jumped over the worm pit, squeezed into the playhouse, and slammed the door. "Whew!" they said together. Then it happened. Nancy was still chasing them. She was running towards the playhouse and toward the worm pit, the big, muddy worm pit. Bean and Ivy knew it was there, but Nancy didn't, and she didn't see it. There they are, hiding in the playhouse. Can you see how they went zigzagging around? This is the line they chose. Zigzag, zigzag, zigzag into the playhouse. She charged toward the playhouse, and whoops, her foot landed on the side of the muddy pit. Ivy and Bean looked out the playhouse window, and they saw Nancy skidding on the slimy edge of the hole. What happens when you skid on slimy, wet mud? Back and forth she wobbled, trying to keep her balance. She kicked out one foot. She waved her arms wildly. She kicked out the other foot. She waved. She kicked. It was perfect. "She's dancing!" yelled Bean. "The spell worked!" worked, yelled Ivy. And just at that moment, with a sloppy, gloopy thud, Nancy slipped off the edge and landed in the muddy goo at the bottom of the worm pit. You see them watching through the little window. The next chapter is called No Dessert. No dessert, said Bean. No videos for a week, but at least they didn't make me stay in my room. Ivy was sitting next to Bean on her front porch. It was almost dark. They watched the bugs flying around the streetlight. I don't think they're really mad, said Ivy. You don't? They had seemed pretty mad to Bean. They have to act mad so they'll seem fair to your sister, Ivy said, but your mom had this little teeny smile on her face when she pulled Nancy out of the pit. She thought it was funny. Nancy doesn't think it's funny. Bean smiled too, remembering. It was funny. It was great. Nancy said she's never going to speak to either of us ever again, and she took back the coloring book she gave me. Well, she never spoke to me before today, so that won't be any different for me, said Ivy. It'll be better for me, but I bet she doesn't stick to it. Bean yawned. It had been a big day. She turned to Ivy. Do you think the spell is what made her dance? Of course. Ivy sounded very sure. But after a minute, she said, I didn't have time to say the spell, really. I really just sort of thought it at the last second. Bean stared into the shadowy yard. Maybe that's why she didn't dance for very long, because you only thought the spell instead of saying it. Next time I'll say it. You're going to do it again? On who? Bean asked. I was thinking about that Mrs. Trance, said Ivy. Bean pictured Mrs. Trance kicking up her feet on the edge of a muddy pit. It would be a beautiful sight. She's thinking about what it would look like. Remember, Mrs. Trance was the lady who yelled at her when they pretended to throw up? Sure, so Ivy said. Maybe I'll try something new on Mrs. Trance, like a storm of grasshoppers. Is that a hard one? No, but we have to start with a lot of grasshoppers, said Ivy. It seems like all the spells have bugs in them, said Bean. Not all of them, said Ivy. Potions don't. Potions? That sounded fun. Let's make a potion, Bean said. Okay, Ivy said. Tomorrow we'll make potions. I know what, said Bean. Tomorrow, let's fix up a lab in your room. Then we can make potions. She pictured a lab with shelves full of little bottles. She and Ivy would wear goggles. Ivy sat up straighter. Yeah, that'll be good. We'll dump the dressing room and get some shelves. Shelves with little bottles, and maybe a counter? Bean! Bean's mother came out onto the front porch. There you are. It's almost bath time. Ivy, do you want me to walk you home? Okay, said Ivy. But Bean's mom sat down beside Bean and looked at the nighttime sky. You girls have certainly had a big day, haven't you? Bean leaned against her mother's arm. Tomorrow we're going to make a lab in Ivy's room. You are you? Said Bean's mom. What for? Potions, said Ivy. What kind of potions? Asked Bean's mom. Secret potions, said Ivy. That's what they're thinking of, all those bottles. There was a silence. Then Bean's mom said, no matches, no poisons, no explosions, no deadly fumes, no bugging Nancy. Is that clear? Ivy and Bean looked at each other and rolled their eyes. Weren't you the one who was always telling me to play with her? Said Bean. Wasn't this all your idea in the first place? Bean's mother smiled at them in the dark. The light on Ivy's porch came on, and Ivy's mom stepped out the door. She waved across the street. Time to come in, honey. Down the stairs and across the circle she came in the moonlight. Ivy stood up, and so did Bean. See you tomorrow. See you tomorrow. And the day after that, Bean added in her mind. Ivy, holding her mother's hand in the middle of the street, turned around to look at Bean. And the day after that, she said. That's the end of Ivy and Bean. They got to be friends after all. All right. Bye for now.